Okay.
Sean is the poster. Really? Yeah. Can I say that I would love it? Sure. Okay, then I think it.
Which one?
Like,
This one? Cheers. Okay, sound check, sound check. What did you say? Sound check, sound check.
Can you guys hear Joanne?
Yes.
Yes.
You can? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So welcome, everybody. Welcome to Murder on the Beach Mystery Bookstore. We have lots of refreshments today. We have great chocolates, compliments of one of our customers. We have great cupcakes and iced tea, water, and of course, wine. Of course. Usually we only have water and wine, you know, very biblical. But today we have iced tea also. Before I introduce Charles, I'd just like to mention that we have 2 book signings in February coming up. The first one is on Saturday, February 12th at 1 o'clock, and that is Deborah Goodrich Royce, and she will be discussing her book Ruby Falls, and that will be both in person and Zoom live streaming like today's event. So if you'd like to attend in person, we'd love to have you. And if you want to attend on Zoom, please email us for the link. And on Thursday, February 17th at 7 o'clock, we will have Bonnie Kistler discussing and signing The Cage. Again, that's in person and also live streaming on Zoom. That's February 17th at 7 p.m. Stacy, is that good? Okay, great. All right. So Charles Todd is the man of the hour tonight. He is the 2017 Mary Higgins Clark Award winner and author of the New York Times bestselling Inspector Ian Rutledge series and the Bess Crawford series. So how many books have you written altogether in both series?
When the next best comes out this year, it'll be 40.
40, an even nice round even number. You started writing when you were 10, right? As well as he's done 2 standalone titles and numerous short stories in many magazines and anthologies. He's been the guest of honor at Malice Domestic and is an Agatha McCavity and Bailey Award winner. Whoa. He's also the former president of the Florida chapter of Mystery Writers of America, which we were great to have. It was great to have him. So, but before I get him started, I'd like to mention that this poster here is available for free to anyone who wants it. Also, I'd like to mention that it's actually his birthday. March 1st.
Stacy was taking me to the airport.
God. And we splurged for this cupcake and candle. Oh well.
Happy birthday. Thanks.
Yeah.
It's my pen name's birthday.
Ah.
Oh, look at, look at.
Well, happy early birthday anyway. So please welcome Charles Todd. Yeah, see, we're really high tech here.
Do I have to hold the same way you do?
No, you put it on your lip.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. And I noticed on Zoom, I saw Stephanie on there and Vicky and several other people. So it's nice to see them virtually as well. This is, we always like coming to Murder on the Beach. Joanne and I were talking about, I believe it's been about 10 years that we've been coming to Murder on the Beach for book signings and transportation and going all kinds of places. So we have quite a history with this bookstore. So it's always something that I look forward to when a new book comes out. And tonight, I'll be talking about A Game of Fear, the latest in the Ian Rutledge series. It's number 24 in the Rutledge series. One of the things that, as you know, Caroline and I co-authored the Ian Rutledge and the Bess Crawford books, as well as the other books that we did. And Caroline and I finished the manuscript for this book in February of last year. It's amazing, but it actually takes a year from the time we turn in the manuscript to the time it's actually on the bookshelf as a book. So it takes a little time, effort, and patience to actually see it come out. And as I had mentioned earlier, Caroline and I turned in the manuscript for the 13th in the Bess Crawford series in July of last year. I believe most of you know that Caroline passed in August of last year. So it's been a little difficult doing this tour, but I remembered how much my mother always enjoyed doing these things. She always got that extra sparkle in her eye, and I knew how much she enjoyed it. It's one of the things you don't realize when you're sitting in a little room somewhere typing away at a computer. The last thing you're thinking about are all the people that you're going to have an opportunity to meet. And over the years, we've met some really special people, both here at Murder on the Beach as well as other places. So once again, it's good to be back. And you've got a free poster? That's nice. Couldn't sell them, huh? So A Game of Fear was something unique that Caroline and I came up with. And we were always afraid that we would finally come up with a mystery that we wouldn't know how to solve. Caroline and I, to use the proper technical term, are seats of the pants authors. Several authors do outlines and details. Jeffrey Deaver, who far outweighs our talents, does a 250-page handwritten rough draft before he even sits down to the computer. And in many ways, we're kind of jealous of that. But I think Caroline said it best when she said that if we already know who did the mystery, what's the fun in writing? So we like to follow Rutledge along as well as the readers to try and figure out what happened. And every time we try to come up with a special case that poses all kinds of difficulties. And in A Game of Fear, we just about came up with one that we didn't know how to solve. A Game of Fear is set in Essex in the spring of 1921. We were smart when we started the Rutledge series. The first book, A Test of Wills, which came out in 1996, was set in May of 1919. it was Rutledge's first case returning to Scotland Yard after serving 4 long years in the trenches of World War One. And as I said, the smart thing we did was we set the books very close together. Otherwise, you can well imagine after 24 books, it'd be 1965, and Rutledge would have troubles getting around, much less cracking his 1914 Rolls Royce. So, but this one takes place in June of 1921. And it is an unusual case in that Rutledge is called to Essex to the home of Lady Benton. Lady Benton is the person who owns and lives in Benton Abbey, which is set, as I said, on the coast of Essex, where they have their salt flats. Many of us are not familiar with how, in its day, Essex was quite well known, not only in England, but around the world for its Malden sea salt. And to this day, if you go to some of the finer gourmet stores, you can still find Malden sea salt. The way the tides come in and go out, they leave pools in the sand that are ultimately pumped out and dried and turned into this sea salt. And it's actually very nice sea salt. And then in its day, Essex made a lot of money as a result of that and was very prosperous. But by the time Rutledge gets there in 1921, a lot of that business had gone away, and it was back to being a sleepy backwater area of England where not many people go. Essex, I think every area of England has its own beauty and its own sense of place and people that live there, but Essex is not really on the tourist list when people visit the various places in England, because it doesn't really have any features that particularly stand out and brings in that type of crowd. And as a result, it's become, and even in Rutledge's time, quite a, I wouldn't say sleepy, but a very quiet area where they didn't have a lot of strangers, and people pretty much kept to themselves and didn't particularly care to have strangers poking around in their business. But Lady Benton is looking out the large French windows of her library in Benton Abbey when she sees a man murder another man right there in front of her. And she's not seeing because it's dark and she's standing on the other side of the window, but she clearly and distinctly recognizes the man who has committed the murder as a Captain Nelson. There's a problem though. When she calls the constable to report it and he comes out, there's no signs in the lawn of any activity, anything taking place. There's no blood, there's no body, there's no sign whatsoever that anything has taken place at all. And a lot of people in the local area are convinced that Lady Benton has finally gone around the bend, so to speak. She lost her husband, her son was killed in the war. They felt that maybe rattling around in that house by herself, she had finally succumbed to all the difficulties she'd been facing and dreamed it up. The other problem is that the man she swears up and down actually committed the murder, Captain Nelson, who was a pilot in the Royal Air Corps, was killed during World War I. And so there's no way, as far as military records are concerned, that he could be around in 1921 to commit a murder, much less do it in front of her house in Essex. Now, ordinarily, that type of situation would raise some eyebrows and be glossed over and not really paid attention to. But Lady Benton, because of her uh, position in society and because of her estate's holdings, knows people who know people, etc. And so it is passed on to the chief constable for that area, who is the one responsible for deciding whether or not to call in Scotland Yard for further investigation. Those of you familiar with the series will remember that Rutledge's boss doesn't like him very much. We've all had bosses like that, I think, at one point or another in our lives. And so Markham is more than happy to get Rutledge out of the office and sent on some wild goose chase. And this seems like a perfect opportunity. So Rutledge is sent off to Essex to meet with Lady Benton and see if he can figure out what has actually happened. So basically, we've got a murder with one witness, no body. The guy who did it's supposedly dead, and they have no real clues to go on. Like I said, when we started writing this book, both of us were scratching our heads rather quizzically, trying to figure out if we were going to be able to solve this crime, much less Rutledge. But somehow we managed to solve the crime in a way that at least the initial reviews, this came out on the 1st of February. The initial reviews have been quite good. So maybe we did the right thing. You'll have to decide for yourselves. But it was also a little more complicated. And the reason why the chief constable was willing to stick his neck out, so to speak, and call in Scotland Yard was during World War One, there was a Royal Air Corps base located right next to Lady Benton's property. And during the war, she opened up her property to the pilots and crew that were serving at the base next door to have a spot where they could come and sit in the gardens and sit overlooking the lake and get a little bit of respite from the conflict that they were facing in the skies, trying to defend England from the tragedies of the war coming to roost at home. And so the chief constable, as well as the military, don't exactly want to tell her to go away and leave them alone, that she's crazy, and they're not really interested in taking care of the situation because of her involvement with that airbase. The airbase had been decommissioned after the war, and there's not much remaining of the original airbase at the time. But Rutledge is tasked with going in and finding out what happened. Did Captain Nelson actually die in the war? Was it confirmed? You know, he may have flown out and didn't come back, but was he indeed killed? These kinds of things. And he also finds, in Rutledge's own unique way, after meeting with and talking to Lady Benton, that she seems very self-aware, very competent, very capable, and a person who knows what she's about. And so as a result, Rutledge is willing to go the extra mile to do a thorough investigation of what is going on. And as usual, he also depends on his variety of resources, including, for those of you who remember, Melinda Crawford, who is a passing character. She's the only character that is in both of our series, the Bess Crawford series as well as the Rutledge series, because Melinda Crawford is related to Bess Crawford's father and was also a close and dear friend of Rutledge's and his sister's parents who were deceased. So she's kind of taken Rutledge under her wing on more than one occasion throughout the series, and she's a character we enjoy having show up from time to time throughout the series, and a couple of other characters that some of you may recognize from previous books. But as I always say, we work really hard to make sure that if A Game of Fear is the first Rutledge book you've ever read, you will not be sitting there going, I don't understand this. I should go back 5 books and find out what's actually going on. We have worked diligently with our editors to make sure that each book stands on its own. Now, for 2 basic reasons, we highly recommend buying them all. One's kind of obvious. Those people who have followed the series throughout and those people who go back and read, I believe you have a copy of the Test of Wells over there, Joanne? You sold the last one? You have more in next week. Those that choose to can go back, starting with the Test of Wells, and there are certain nuances about the character development throughout the series that you will pick up on my going through the books in order, but it is not a requirement in order to be able to enjoy the books. So we work very hard to make sure that's taken care of. Stacy, are you able to get questions from? Okay. While Stacy's taking care of that, my favorite part of doing this kind of thing after I do my sales pitch is to open things up and let you ask questions about anything you'd like to know about the series, the writing process, whatever you would like. I'm perfectly free to answer whatever questions you may have. Yes. That's a tough question. When Caroline passed away last year, Game of Fear was going through its last stages of being edited and ready for production. So my first priority was to get A Game of Fear through the editing process, the final phases of the editing process and into production so that we would meet the deadline of February 1st. The second most important thing on my list is working with what the grand title for the new Bess right now is Bess 13. It is in the process, it's going through the editing process with HarperCollins Morrow right now, and I'm hard at work. So my number one goal was to make sure that these 2 last manuscripts that we did together get finished, produced, and on the shelves in as excellent a condition as I can possibly make for Caroline. I have taken a look at doing a Rutledge to carry on the series. It's a very difficult question. Caroline and I established a reputation for quality, historical accuracy, and character development. And I want to make sure that whatever I do doesn't detract from that. Now, I'm a realist. I know that whatever I do, if another Rutledge or Bess comes out, your reviewers are going to look back at the 25 years worth of work and go, well, it's okay. If so, I will be doing another Rutledge. I will be sending it to our agent, Lisa Gallagher, for review, and a couple of close people that we've used in the past to run the books by. And then if we feel it lives up to the standards that I want to maintain, then it will be submitted to Morrow for consideration, and then we'll move forward. I have an idea for what to do with the next Rutledge, and I'm working very hard on doing some research. I am signed up to go to England in June. It's because of COVID, I haven't been in 2 years. And so I'm definitely looking forward to spending some time in England, because Caroline and I both felt you have to spend time on the ground. Google and all that stuff is wonderful, and you can read all the books in the world, but until you actually put feet on the ground, so to speak, you don't have an opportunity. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that Deanna and I will be able to go back in June. So that was a long answer. Yeah.
Does this mean that you might not start a new series that's just yours? Just yours?
Charles, could you repeat the question for the people on Zoom?
Oh, okay.
Because they can't hear.
You were asking about whether or not I wanted to do something on my own.
Yeah, entirely separate series.
I have something that I've been sort of toying with for many years that I would like to do. This is my number one priority. And because of time restraints, it's important that as soon as Bess is accepted by the publisher and starts the production process, my primary goal is to get started on the next Rutledge so that I have something to continue. If that's kind of a daunting task, depending on what happens with that will really determine what I do and how soon I do it. If I take a good effort at Rutledge and we just feel that it's not what it needs to be, then I'll turn my attention back to other things that I'm working on. But I'm certainly hoping the two things have been really nice. One, the overwhelming response from the fans has been a real comfort to myself, my family, and I can't thank everybody enough for all the well wishes and cards and everything that were sent. That meant a great deal. And there has been an overwhelming demand. Please keep it going. So I'm trying to listen to that, make that my primary goal. Yes, Stacy.
Catalina is asking if you'll ever do a full crossover book with Rutledge and Bess instead of just a little character visit.
Well, it's funny. We did that kind of in Racing the Devil, when Rutledge sends a note to Melinda, who is on board ship with Bess. There are two basic reasons why we avoided that. First of all, Bess right now is in 1919, early 1920. time frame, and Rutledge is all the way up at 21. So making sure that when we have Bess on a boat going somewhere, that we remember that when she gets to the same time period in her own series. The other thing that we said from the outset was that we never intended Bess to be a wife for Rutledge. She is her own very independent person with her own opportunities in her professional and personal life. And we don't plan to try and combine the two. But as far as like a cameo kind of thing, we're not adverse to that. It's just, it has to make sense for the series, not just something we do. I hope that answers Catalina's question. She may still be scratching her head. Oh, I'm sure she will. Catalina's a great friend of ours. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
I have to admit, I just started becoming a big fan of the Roderick series just Christmas, so I'm just in the third book. For me, it's just amazing how, again, going back to the First World War, the shell shock was so, like you write in the book, he was considered as a coward. And for me, Roderick is I feel so sorry for him because again, I'm only reading the third book. He doesn't have any friends, any support, and he's always by himself. And everybody thinks he's a crazy lunatic. So where does he get the energy? Because even in the first one, I mean, this so kind of he was even thinking about maybe I'm like the alcoholic. I'm pretty close to this. I mean, he's really walking this.
You're talking about the other veteran in the Test of Wells, yeah.
And when he sees this, and again, he's so close because there's nobody that really feels for him. Everybody says, "Oh, we want to get rid of him." So, and also writing this for me, it's so. Every time when he's by himself in the room by himself, and everybody is just so negative. So, what brings him really that he wants to survive?
Well, he's got Hamish.
Yeah, but Hamish is also not really supporting him. He makes sometimes really also his life miserable. I mean, if I had Hamish in my head all the time, I would get crazy.
Yes. Well, and
You need to repeat the question.
I think the synopsis to what you asked was Rutledge is out there on his own and has no one to turn to for support. And that's when later on in the series, we start bringing in people like Melinda Crawford, who does provide some of that support. But initially, especially in the first three books, we were trying to communicate one very important thing. Shell shock in England at that time was considered a moral weakness. It was considered something that was despised, and not only did it reflect on the person, but it also reflected on their family, that somehow their family had raised someone who didn't have the typical British stiff upper lip and couldn't cope with the things. And so on the one hand, Rutledge is in a position where he doesn't want anybody to know what he's going through. So even if he had that support mechanism, he can't turn to it. He can't, even now, although some things are starting to become a little more apparent, Melinda Crawford and all her well-intentioned support, he's still a little reticent to bring this up because she has, through her husband, had a military background. he has just had his fiance basically tell him to get lost because he's having these issues. And that's why we chose the title of Test of Wills for the first book, because it is a test of Rutledge's will. If I'm not giving anything away with this one. Towards the end of the book, in the Test of Wills, the last page or two, Rutledge says, "Whatever else I've lost, this one is mine." He solved the case. And Hamish said, "I'm not done with you yet." And that really describes Rutledge's situation all the way up through now, when a lot of people have asked, isn't he going to find somebody to settle down with, a wife, a companion, something in his life? And although we've had some people pass through his life that he definitely had some interest in, he's still a little concerned about revealing all of this. And it does kind of get back to what I was describing about the character development over the length and breadth of the series. In 2014, we wrote a special book for the 100th anniversary of World War I called A Fine Summer's Day. And it was a visit with Rutledge on that fine summer day before the Archduke is assassinated, before he has gone off to serve in war, when he is newly engaged to be married and everything is wonderful. And I think the hardest part for Caroline and I both, when we got, there were two difficult things. First of all, we thought we knew Rutledge pretty well, and then we were writing this prequel, if you want to call it that, and we realized there was a lot more about Rutledge we needed to find out in order to be able to write that book. But the other thing was, is when we got to the end of that book, it was very difficult for us because we knew what we were sending Rutledge off to, and the price he was about to pay. And it does, between finding cases for Rutledge to solve that are as impossible as we can come up with and everything else. Yeah, we've been kind of rough on Rutledge, I'll be honest with you. But we're trying our best to describe a specific time in history and the effects that it had not only on Rutledge, but as he goes around to the different towns and villages around England, and we're able to describe what is happening to everybody as a result of that war. Although we were primarily driven by two basic things. One, World War I was a pivotal event in the 20th century that has repercussions that we're still dealing with today. I was interested, last week I was listening to a news story about what's going on in Ukraine. And one of the things they brought up was a nation's right to self-determination. Until the Treaty of Versailles, that concept never existed. They created Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia, and created Hungary, and put Poland back together as a result of that war, based on the whole concept of a nation's right to self-determination. And you can see to this day the problems we're having there, and the problems that we're having in the Middle East, and the problems that we've had with the Balkan area of the world. So we're trying to explain that. We're trying to explain the real difficulties that were faced by the British people as a result of that war, with losing that many men, how the role of women had really changed. It was the beginning of the new modern era of Britain, it was no longer the Victorian or Edwardian area where things were very cleanly defined. All of a sudden, women were exposed to new roles that they'd never been exposed to before. The right to vote had come back. And very shortly after the war, you had England opened up voting not only for women, but for non-landed people as well, which they took a big risk, as well as the fact that as a result of that war, all the royal houses of England fell. And most of them were directly or indirectly related to the King of England through Victoria, especially Kaiser Wilhelm, who was a cousin, and Tsar Nicholas, who actually wound up getting killed. The new influence and spread of communism throughout Europe as a result of what happened in Russia. It just goes on, and we had to try and say, okay, how do we explain that without writing a 1,000-page tome? And we felt that we could do it best through Rutledge, but it is difficult. But he makes his little victories here and there, and maybe there'll be some good news in a game of fear. You never know. No spoilers, right? Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to comment, I just started reading your book. When Bonnie invited me to come up here to the thing. And this brings back big memories to me. This is my mother. They owned the boarding house in Cirencester, Gloucestershire. And it was conscripted. And they had 16 soldiers staying with them. My mother was about 7 or 8. She said only 2 of them came home. And she would tell me about the Zeppelins and the geese that would warn them when they were coming over, and all the different things about the war and the Titanic sinking and all that. And I'm really fascinated with this book.
Thank you. We found it fascinating too. I will never forget, we had stopped in one village in England during World War I. All the people from a local area would sign up and become part of local units. You had your Yorkshire regiments, you had for the various areas around England. And as a result, when they would have things like the Battle of the Somme, where they lost so many men in one day, the British Army lost more men in that one day than the combined history of the British Army prior to that day. And as a result, when an entire regiment would get wiped out, we think of the telegram or the military chaplain coming and knocking on front doors. No, it was the whole town. Sons, fathers, uncles. And I was in a small town in England, a typical Norman church with the square tower with the nave behind it. And I was standing in that bell tower, and they had etched in the walls the names of the various men that had died in the Great War. And I'm reading along and I'm going up. And it got to the point where it was so high up that it was so far away, and because of the shadows and everything, I couldn't read the names anymore, but they just kept going up. And the one thing I realized was so many of them had the same last name, and the dates were all together. And you realize that one day somebody would have an entire family of young men, and the next day they wouldn't. And it was a very difficult time for them. But we try to find a bright side to it too. And the thing that keeps us going is Rutledge. Rutledge has a stubbornness and a self-determination that keeps him going. And I think that's one of the things that we have come to admire in him, and I think our readers have as well, where some of the support that you're talking about isn't laid out specifically. You get a real sense that Rutledge likes what he does, and he likes helping people without spelling it out for the readers as we go along. But it's difficult. That's why I'm so looking forward to going back to England, because the British, it's hard to have a conversation with the British. They're very private people, with two exceptions. Their dog. As a dog owner, people will open up if you start petting and talking to them about their dog. And the other thing is that a lot of the towns in England still have the market day, where all the vendors and everything come in to sell their wares on market day. And I love, even in larger towns like Stratford-on-Avon and places like that, York, they'll have a huge town market, and you go along to the different booths and you start talking to them about their wares and what they're selling, and they're very eager to tell you what things are and where they come from. And it ultimately leads to some really fascinating stories that we try, without naming them, to incorporate into our books. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Pardon me? We do have a following in England. It was difficult at first. The British don't like Americans who write books about England. So it was difficult at first to break into that market. We do have a good following in England. The interesting thing is our #1 translation sales are in Germany. And I think in part it's because we deal with the aftermath of war and not the war in particular, and we don't spend a lot of time talking about one side versus the other, because at this point people don't care. All they care about is, how am I going to survive tomorrow and deal with what has happened already. And so it does sell extremely well in Germany. Japanese was a little unique. I had to learn in Japan, the way they read their books, they're backwards. So you have to sign it on the back page, not the front page, because for them it's their back page. But that was interesting. Anybody else? Well, I'm happy to sign anything for you, including I'll personalize a free poster. Pardon me?
It's already signed.
Well, it's signed, but it's not personalized. So, we'll.
And please, everybody have some cupcakes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. And the people who joined us online as well. Figure out a way to attach myself.
I'm hooked.
Oh, good. I'm glad to
No,
hear that.
yeah.
Let me check with Joanne, see if we have.
By the way, she's very, on book 3, I've already bought up to book 8. Just to make sure I keep ahead of her.
I'm so sorry.